This week, I get to have a conversation with award-winning underwater photographer Glen Cowans. Glen tells how he and his wife shared their journey into scuba diving later on in life than you would imagine. And he also talks about his progression with photography and camera equipment to where he is now. He shares how only after a few exhibitions he decided to turn his back on his safe electrical engineering job to follow his passion. Glen also talks about the balancing act between the artistic, technical and business aspects of his work, as well as the background behind his beautiful gallery in the West End of Fremantle and his use of social media to market his work. Glen is a very private person, so it's an absolute treat to get to know more about the man behind some of the most iconic and beautiful underwater pictures here in Western Australia. So enjoy Glen. Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host Bryn Edwards. Bringing nature and the art of photography together while also running a business is the focus of today's conversation with award-winning underwater photographer Glen Cowans. Glen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bryn. Well, thank you for having me. Yep.
So one of the questions I always ask my guests, because it's called WA Real, is the first part about the WA. So you were born and bred in Western Australia, that's correct?
Yep.
Tell me a bit about growing up in Western Australia and how that shaped you and what it means to be a Western Australian.
Yeah, okay, fascinating. I grew up out in Rivervale, Belmont, near the racecourse there, and probably my most avid memory from childhood was that it was, at that time, mostly like small pastures and things around. That's how old I am. and I can remember going down to the creeks nearby and hunting for tadpoles and frogs and things like that. And so I think that sort of, at a very, very young age, just gave me a fascination with nature and the aquatic realm, even in freshwater there in paddocks. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah. What else do you remember about growing up in Western Australia?
I can remember the Meckering earthquake and neighbours running down the street to our house for some obscure reason. I don't know why. It was a state housing commission area, and I can remember them all panicking and being at our house. I have no idea why they came to our house, but that's what everyone did. I can remember the first time we got a colour TV, which was quite fascinating. Riding to school. It's funny. I don't remember a lot of particular things about my childhood. It's funny. I've often wondered about that.
Right.
But I did have a very good childhood, I think. Yeah, very balanced. Yeah.
So, there's, as we'll get into a bit later, you moved from being an electrician to being a photographer.
Yes.
So there's a real creative spark in what you do, being an underwater photographer.
Compared to that.
Yeah. And obviously that's your sort of passion and that's what you enjoy. Where does that creative spark come from in Glen's story?
I have no idea. My sister's, Jill's, very creative. She can paint and sketch and everything just naturally incredibly well. There's no musical slant to it because I'm one of those guys that can't even dance because I don't have a beat.
Right.
But English was my favourite subject at school. Maths and science my worst.
Right.
Yet through being pushed by my father, who was a boilermaker at that stage, to get a trade, I became an electrical fitter with what was then Sequa, which was very close to us over in Belmont anyway. And I did pretty good at it. I was never bad at my job. I think I was reasonably good, but I had to really apply myself technically to do that, where compared to other students that or other apprentices that could do it naturally. They had brains the size of planets. I mean, I ended up in building automation, computer-controlled buildings, and I was working with guys that did literally have brains the size of planets. They could just look at something and program it within an hour, and I would spend 3 days doing the same thing. I would get it right, but it would take me that long.
Yeah.
So I think the technical aspect was strived for, but possibly the the love of nature and the creative side, with which probably only came out in my English, which you wouldn't believe when you talk to me. But writing, I'm a little bit better at. I think that's where I sort of had more of a creative slant. Yeah.
Right. So that's where it sort of came from.
I did warn you that I would be a very poor person to talk to, because I had a flashback this morning when I was just washing my face after getting up, to one of my childhood reports from primary school, and I remember it does not communicate well with others.
Well, we'll see where we go this morning. So there are obviously two components to what you do. There's the photography and then there's the ocean.
Yes.
I would like to just jump into the, pardon the pun, the ocean part of it. And tell me about your relationship with the ocean and how it's evolved.
That would be heavily influenced through my father, who was a British submariner during the war, was based here at times. And that's where he met my mother, and after the war came here as a merchant seaman, and then obviously married and that sort of thing. And so I grew up, my dad had loved nothing better than to bring us down to Fremantle and look at the ships. It was his thing. He would do that as many times as you would let him. And we'd do things like, we'd fish a lot, which I don't do now, because once you start photographing the creatures, it's very hard to kill them. We'd fish a lot, but my dad would always take us to the beach, and I can remember climbing on his back and holding on to his head while he swam around. This was before I was a strong swimmer, I could swim very well at all. So yeah, that sort of gave me a passion for the water, and then we would love nothing better than on an evening sitting there watching Jacques Cousteau documentaries, and that's where I really got the inspiration, I think, for underwater, and a fascination with the fact that Dad had gone underwater in submarines. Yeah.
And then how that's obviously the genesis of the relationship. How has it changed and moved over the years? Because for some people it's a big scary place. It's also full of wonder and beauty, obviously, that you capture, but it's a unique place in terms of you've got to want to go into the ocean. A lot of people will happily
steer away from it,
look at it, but steer away from it.
Yeah. I took up scuba diving quite late in life, in my 30s, I think it was. I did learn scuba diving when I was at high school, went to Kewdale High School, and at the time it was probably very progressive in some of the options you could do for physical education, and everything from sailing, which I did as well, to for a public school, it's quite amazing, sailing to scuba diving. And I remember doing my first ocean dive down at Cottesloe there, near the Small Groin, and it was back in the days when it wasn't as regulated as it is now, and we had one instructor, one assistant, and I think there was 20 students, and that just wouldn't happen today.
Yeah.
And I can remember going into the water, it was swelly, it was murky, and we were all swimming out through the waves, getting pounded by the waves, and then we had to descend, and I just couldn't descend. My ears I couldn't get the equalisation right, and I was probably panicking and hyperventilating. And I can remember the rest of the group were just gone, and the visibility was so bad you couldn't see where they were. And I just ended up paddling back into shore with all my scuba gear on. First time I've ever done this, the tank and everything was huge and heavy, and peeling it off while rolling in the waves and getting pounded by the waves and covered in sand and everything, and taking all the gear off and just sitting on the shore and saying, well, I'm never going to do that again in my life.
So how did you end up coming to it later in your 30s?
We were down at, my wife and I were down at Eagle Bay, down down south, Denmark, Dunsborough, and Louise was a bit of a beach bunny. She loved lying on the beach and being at the beach, but going in the water wasn't a big thing.
Yeah.
And if we went, she'd only do it to go in to cool off, and if we went anywhere near the rocks and weed and creepy things, she would freak out and not want to go. I would always, because I loved snorkeling by that stage, take a mask and snorkel and fins with me and go snorkeling around the rocks and see what I could see. And I found this small section of weed that was just full of little fish and things, and I just came back and I just said, look, come and try my mask and just hold my hand and come and have a look at this. It's just beautiful. It's fascinating. And the water was crystal clear. The light was streaming down.
Yeah.
And we were only in about waist deep water. So I took her out there, put the mask on, showed her how to sort of put the spit in so it wouldn't fog up, and did all that, and held her hand, and she put her head gradually underwater, just holding her breath. And I'll never forget her eyes. When she came out of the water, her eyes came out and they were wide as, and she was just captivated.
Yeah.
And so that started a process.
Yes.
I gradually, I decided I would teach her how to snorkel. So the next stage was the snorkel. And for people that have never done it, the concept of breathing through your mouth while your head's underwater is a very hard thing to overcome. And a lot of people have panic attacks about it when they're trying to learn it. You have to think about it, yeah. So I got her into that very, very, very slowly. There's methods you can do that sort of calm people down to do that. And then it went from the snorkel to the fins. And the fins were good because it gave her movement. And you've got to remember, this girl could hardly swim. So as soon as she got fins on, she was moving quite well. Louise was also the kind of person that, she's one of those people, I've never seen in anyone else that's negatively buoyant. If she were to try and float on her back, she would just sink, like a stone.
Right. Okay.
I've never seen it before in anybody.
Yeah.
So then the next stage was the wetsuit, and the wetsuit was wonderful because all of a sudden there was this insulation layer for warmth, but also an insulation layer that the weed and horrible yucky things didn't touch her.
Yeah.
So she loved that. And that was going really well. Then came the weight belt.
Yeah.
And just a couple of weights so she could duck dive down. Because before the wetsuit she was able to duck dive down.
Yeah.
After it she wasn't. And then she started to get really good with that. I was pretty good at making sure she wasn't overly weighted, which can create panic. And I'll never forget one day out at Cottesloe, there, the same place I actually learnt and failed to scuba dive.
Right.
She duck dived down and I was watching her from the surface, very proud. And she's just cruising above the kelp and the rock, and she put her hand down, and as she put her hand down she didn't realise what she was putting her hand on was an octopus.
Oh.
And they both jumped very, very quickly, the octopus and Louise. So anyway, after that, long story longer, I came home one day from work and said, I've signed us up both for a scuba diving course. And she just didn't want to do it. I think if she probably would have come close to divorcing me over it. She just didn't want to do it. But we were very lucky. We did it at the time with Perth Diving Academy, and we did it in the off season. What month was it? Must have been about May, I think. And we had Leanne, who was a very, very good female instructor, and very patient. We had to get Louise to learn to swim. Which was very, very difficult. I had to take her down the pool, and she had to be able to tread water for a certain amount of time, and that was hard. But Louise is a bit OCD, fortunately, and once she's made up her mind she's going to do something, she will push herself to
Gets done.
Beyond pain, beyond anything to do it. So she did master that. And I'll remember the first ocean dives we did at Rottnest. The first dive, we were lucky there was only 3 of us on the course. And the first dive, we went down, it was lovely visibility, it was a very calm day, it was those beautiful autumn days. And as she was coming up the ladder under the boat, behind the other older guy in the course, he kicked off her mask as he was sort of going up the ladder. She was following too close behind him. She handled it quite well, didn't drown or anything, but came up from that going, I don't know really why anyone gets off on this, you know. It's like, I think she'd made up her mind then that she was going to do the course, but that was it. So then we had the second dive of the day. by then she was more calm and relaxed, and that was just a wonderful dive in a secluded little calm bay, quite shallow. There were lionfish, all sorts of tropical fish there, which we get at Rottnest with the Lewin Current, and she came up from that and she was hooked. And so since then, it's just been a love affair with the ocean for both of us.
Yeah, so it's something you've done together.
And I think that is a big help.
That
it's something we've done together. I get a lot of motivation from Louise, definitely.
Right. What have been some of the sort of exciting moments, and what have been some of the scary moments you've had personally in the ocean?
Exciting. It never really stops. Really, there's lots of excitement and wonderment. Probably one of the most wonderful dives I've had have been off Mexico with the giant mantas that are between 6 and 7 metres from wingtip to wingtip. A frustration I have is that we're not in a financial position that we can go and do these pseudo expeditions like Sharks Cousteau on our own. We have to do it with other people, other paying customers and that sort of thing. So I was sharing these giant mantas with all these other people on the boat, and all they wanted to do was swim beneath the manta with their arms wide. So it was very impossible to get a shot of these mantas. So the best dive of my memory was one where there was a very strong current on this site. It's called El Boiler. It's just a very deep pinnacle coming up out of nowhere, and it's swept by these huge currents, and the boat was swinging right off the back on the taut on the mooring line because of this current, and everyone jumped in. I was last because I was doing something with my camera, and everyone jumped in, even Louise with 2 of our friends that were also on the boat, and they swam off, and as they're heading towards the pinnacle, they could see beyond the pinnacle was all the mantas. So they swam out there, and I jumped in, I'm following them, and as I'm heading away from the pinnacle towards the mantas, I'm going, oh, hang on, the current's actually pushing me this way as well. No, I think I'll swim back to the pinnacle, the mantas will come back. And then what happened was everyone had to be picked up about half a mile away because the current took them away. So I had the whole site to myself and the mantas for an hour, and it was one of the best dives of my life because they were just coming in within inches of my head. And I was just able to photograph them and photograph them and photograph them. So it was wonderful. So that's probably one of the most wonderful, but there's so many to mention. Probably the scariest moment we've had would be our own operator error. It's something I guess I learnt from my technical days, that usually when there's a problem, it's 90% of the time operator error, and it was our own ability with some equipment. Quite often on these high current dives, and high current dives are very good because current is where you tend to get a lot of the nature happening. It's the busiest places on the reef because current brings food, and food brings fish, and then that brings bigger fish and that sort of thing. The problem with doing current dives is that you have to be prepared for them, and you have to be able to at least control the situation to a degree. And one of the things you need to be able to do when it's an extremely strong current, and you know that, especially if you've been very deep and you've pushed the limits of your decompression or no decompression time, you have to do your stop before you can come up so that you off gas and don't get the bends. Now, this was at a time, well, I wouldn't say it's at a time when we were being cheap on gear, it's just at a time, I guess, where familiarity made me not do something fully, and that was buy quite the right equipment and do a bit of an ad hoc MacGyver type situation where I created the equipment, and you have to be able to release a float, an air inflated float that you inflate from your mouthpiece to the surface on a line, so that you then hang off that line at 5 metres drifting out into the blue. Because there's no reef to be next to. You can't fin against the current because it's too strong. So you're just going to go out into the open sea, and they have to know where you are.
And your boat knows where you are.
Yeah. So you have to be able to do this, and we're releasing this line quite deep because you leave the reef. This is at a site in Palau that's very, very strong current, and we were releasing this line at about 18 metres or so, and the idea is you have the line on a spool, but we didn't. I had it wrapped around the what we call the safety sausage, the float, and so I unravelled it all so that it would be free to let me put the float up. And as I was doing that, I didn't realise that it had floated over Louise's equipment on her buoyancy compensator at BC and tangled in her BC inflator, and then I put the air in it and it rocketed towards the surface, and the second it left my hand I saw it around Louise's BC or her inflator hose, and I just reached my fingers in there to try and get it out, and at that time it just tightened on my fingers. So this thing's trying to head to the surface, and we're swimming down to counteract that as hard as we can, while at the same time I've got both hands trying to get this off her inflator. At the same time it was cutting into my finger on the fingers that were caught in there like a razor. It was just ripping into it. The other thing was, at the other end of it, I had a little lead sinker about an inch, 25 millimetres long. Fortunately, that had snagged in the coral, and that was taut. So, but this is all happening in my mind in slow motion, but it was all happening quite quick. And all I can think of was powering down, because we couldn't get to the safety sausage to release the air out of it to stop it racing towards the surface. And all I could think of was us both powering down to counteract this. Unfortunately, Louise was switched on enough to do the same thing. And eventually I got it out. Now, at that time too, we travelled without a diver's knife, because I sort of had the attitude of, it's a big macho thing, what do you need a diver's knife for, you know?
Yeah.
And now we carry a knife on our BC everywhere we go around the world.
Yeah.
And fortunately I managed to just get it off and problem solved. But that was a situation where we both could have been dragged to the surface at high speed without any decompression. If we hadn't breathed out enough, we probably would have got a burst lung. Who knows what. And we'd been down quite a long time, so we probably would have got the mends. So we potentially both could have died. So that's probably a situation that's more likely to happen to you than a shark attack.
Yeah.
So you have to. Since then, we're pretty anal on equipment and how we do things. Yeah, it was a
you
good.
You just brought up sharks. Though. Is that ever a thought, mind, worry, concern?
Yeah, I've always had a fear of sharks. It's one of the reasons I actually wanted to scuba dive as well. Was I used to do a lot of windsurfing and wave skiing when I was a child. I still windsurf, and I've always had that fear of sharks. When I was at school, my pet science project was anything to do with sharks.
To understand that.
So I've read all the books showing all the shark attacks with legs ripped off and all this sort of thing. They're quite gory photos, that sort of thing. So that, and I think the movie Jaws had a lot to answer for my psyche about sharks.
Many other people.
So, yeah, that's one of the reasons I probably took it up, was to face that fear. But it's a balanced fear. I mean, I still think you have to respect them. I still worry a little bit about what's happening with people jumping in with sharks a lot, because I think those people that are jumping in and snorkeling with sharks, I think, have taught us wondrous things. They've taught us that sharks aren't the man-eaters we think we are. And it makes you wonder whether a lot of the shark attacks that happen take people spearing, hunting or whatever out of the equation, because that creates a different dynamic. But if in situations where people are just in the water, whether they're snorkeling or scubaing or whatever, and there's a shark attack, or even possibly swimming, although swimming it's probably harder to do anything because you can't see what's going on. But I think one of the things these people snorkeling with sharks have given us is that our behaviour can dictate what the situation is. So these people wonderfully are jumping in and snorkeling down and swimming along with great whites and tiger sharks, things like that. And it's proved that they're not just going to mindlessly chomp you. But it does make me wonder too, with the advent of social media, that someone will jump in doing that, thinking it's all going to be wondrous and good like you would be if you were jumping in with a seal or dolphin, and then getting themselves into a panic situation. So I think, that needs to be sort of gauged well. But yeah, sharks are an amazing creature. When you see them underwater, they are just beautiful. And sadly, there's only 90% of them left. So they predict or estimate at the moment. Probably the most majestic shark to me would be the hammerhead, the great hammerhead. There's nothing that swims as beautifully and as sinusoidal as a hammerhead. It's just fantastic.
So tell me about the journey with photography then, and how you went from being from an electrical career into where you are now.
I taught myself photography back in when I was about 21, way before I'd met my wife. I just bought a book on 35mm photography.
Why was that?
Don't know. I don't really know why I did, but I did. And bought a Canon A1 program, which is pretty much what anyone bought those days, as a little 35mm camera to try and teach themselves photography. And just took it from there. Did it probably for about 3 or 4 years. Sort of got the hang of shutter speed and f-stop and the various aspects of it, and time exposures at night and all that sort of thing. And then got bored with it and dropped it completely and didn't take it up. But when I started scuba diving, and it was back in the days when underwater photography wasn't a lot of people doing it. Not like now, just about everybody who dives has a camera. Back then, you couldn't afford them. And I bought myself a little plastic, I think it was the 110 format, which was much smaller than 35mm.
Right.
Minolta Weathermatic.
Was it the yellow one?
Yellow one.
I had one of those.
Yeah.
The flat thing.
Yeah. And
the thing you put around the wrist with that.
Yeah, and it was waterproof to 5 metres.
Yeah.
And I routinely took that down to about 18 metres in depth. And I remember in Bali, I was on the wreck at Tulumbin. I was down at about 18 or so metres, and I'd been photographing. And those things, do you remember they would rewind by themselves when they got to the end of the roll? Yeah. It would just start rewinding. And I got to the end of the roll and it started rewinding, and so I'm swimming around because, can't take any photos, so I'm just swimming around and it's rewinding. And after about 10 minutes, I noticed it was still rewinding, and I'm going, what? How can it still be rewinding? It would have got to the end of the roll. So I started ascending, and I noticed when it rewound, I don't know if you remember, you could see it counting backwards on the counter.
Yep.
And I looked at the counter and it was still on 36. And I'm ascending and going up. And as soon as I got to my safety stop at 5 metres, which happens to be where it was waterproof to, I started seeing that the countdown spool was counting down, as in it was rewinding. And then it got to the end and stopped. And I think the body had been so distorted by the depth that the gears weren't meshing and it wasn't rewinding. Right. So that was my first camera. And then after that, I purchased another yellow one, the Monomarine 2, which was a horrible little camera. All you had was a few f-stops. You had to manually predict your focus. You couldn't see through the lens. So you had to manually sort of set your focus, guessing what it was, even despite the apparent different magnification underwater. And there was no shutter speed. I remember at the time, I think I joined the West Australian Underwater Photographic Society by then, and I remember at the time getting a lot of ridicule about that camera because it was just a cheap plastic camera, And I remember one of the owners of a large dive outlet in Perth at the time laughed at me when I said I'd got it. He was quite a good photographer, and said, "You'll never get a good photo with that." And so that got my back up. So I went from shooting film, as in negative film, to slide film, positive film. Now, slide film is the worst to shoot, because if you don't get the exposure right, you've stuffed the shot, because you can't adjust for it in processing unless you adjust the whole roll.
Right.
So what you shot is what you got.
Yeah.
And you would be lucky if I got 2 or 3 keepers out of a roll of 36.
Yeah.
But I persevered with that, and then they brought out a new model that actually had shutter speed, but it still wasn't much better. And it only gave you an exposure meter that said if you were too dark. It didn't say if you were too light. So
right.
You had to adjust it to too dark and then come back one. And even as it was, its evaluation of too dark and too light was quite arbitrary. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I met a friend, Peter, and at Warps, and he was very creative in setting up the shot underwater. He would often do double exposures and look for interesting things and different ways to shoot, and that got my mind going. A friend of mine, Peter Nicholas, and we would often talk at dinner about how to set up shots, and this is all doing things in camera. This is way before Photoshop. And how to get creative angles and different sort of things. And we did things like mermaids blowing a stream of bubbles underwater using glass balls suspended on fishing line under the bus and jetty. We did things like that to orb reflections in these same bowls amongst corals of a diver's face. Louise and I used to bushwalk, and we found this weir up in the hills where there was a V-shaped water chute where the water just streamed out, and if you went there at the end of the rains in winter and the dam was very full, the weir was very full, the water was crystal clear. And I remember taking this little yellow camera up there to test it out, and I just held my hand in the water to try some shots, just guessing the angle, guessing the composition, guessing the exposure. No digital feedback straight away to see if you got it wrong. You had to wait till you get home or get it back from processing. And I remember my hand was so freaking cold in this water that it was hurting while I was doing this. My hand was actually hurting. Anyway, I took some shots. Oh, this looks really promising. So we teed it up with our friend Peter and managed to find a trail that would get us in there for a four-wheel drive. And we went in with camera equipment, scuba tank, and my little yellow camera. And we had Peter as virtually the safety person. And we had Louise. I'd set up a rope that hooked onto one side of the weir wall, and then on the other side of the weir where the V was, and it came down and attached to her weight belt. We didn't have any weights on her, but just a weight belt. And she wore a wetsuit. And the plan was for Louise to virtually be riding the chute of the weir, almost like a bodyboarder or a wood, with the water running just below her chest sort of thing, holding her up. And then she would grab the weir and pull herself down into the water course that was coming out, and I would be inside the dam shooting up, getting her and this beautiful reflection. And she did it, and she's complained to me ever since that her neck is totally stuffed from this. But yeah, she pulled herself down, we got this beautiful reflection. Anyway, these are a sequence of shots and the orb shot and some shots on the recently sunk HMAS Swan. And I entered the South Pacific Divers Club Underwater Photographer of the Year competition. And at its time, it was probably the most prestigious competition in Australia, if not the Asia Pacific region here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I won the novice section of that, and so I quite proudly, when I received the trophy, and at the same time my friend Peter also won the open, the professional section.
Right.
So it was a WA win for both of us. So we both went over. They didn't tell me that I'd won. They just said you've won a prize. They knew I'd won, but didn't let me know. So I was gobsmacked when they said I'd won first prize there. And I remember standing up and saying, well, what's going to knock your socks off is I won it with this. I pulled out my little yellow camera.
Yeah.
And the jaws dropped. CNC at the time, who are now big in underwater photography and digital, came up to me and said they wanted me to write stories and things about the camera, and I said, oh, what's in it for me? And they said, oh, we'll give you some free film.
Right, cool.
So I said, no, forget it.
Right.
Go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to win that. But that said, straight after that, I went and bought a second-hand full SLR system from another friend who was selling his very old one at the time. And that's where I got into the more professional level equipment.
Right.
And so then it was what you saw is more like what you shot, because it was through the lens. You could get your exposure far more accurately. You had different lens choices, wide angle, macro, everything. So that was the start. Yeah.
And how did you make the decision to go and do this full time professionally?
Midlife crisis. By that stage, Louise and I had started doing quite a lot of dive travel, whether it be up north or overseas. And I was at the stage where I was thinking there's got to be more to life than 4 weeks leave a year, you know.
Yes.
And by that stage, I was working for a building automation company. I was pretty good, reasonably good at my job. I was one of the on-call guys, which was very, very frustrating because I hated being on call. I hated my time away from work being intruded upon. And you knew you were going to get call-outs every time, and they'd often be at 2 o'clock in the morning, that sort of thing. And I was just hating my job even more. And the company was good. They knew what I did, and by that stage they were giving me leave without pay and that sort of thing, so I could get extra time off. But I was just fed up. And I'd been entering competitions and things like that at the time, and there were a few glimpses of the more creative shots, the macros, the abstracts, that sort of thing, that I put out there. And they did reasonably well. And Louise said to me, why don't you have an exhibition of your work? Not the stuff you put in travel articles and magazine articles, because I started dabbling in that.
Yeah. But
the abstract stuff, the really interesting stuff. And so finding someone at that time to print in what they call the giclée process, it sounds a bit of a tosser word, but it's a French word for squirt, and that's what they call the process where you print onto canvas or paper in very large sizes using pigment inks, which are paint instead of dye ink. At that time it was in its infancy, there wasn't many people doing it, and I shopped around images. I'd already started using digital in a form then, because I was scanning images to send them to magazines, because I got sick of sending my slides and either not getting them back or getting them back damaged, so I'd scan them. At the time it was a good scanner, but nowadays you wouldn't even use it to prop a door open. It was horrible. So I understood digital a fair bit by then already, which was an advantage, and I took some images around to different people at the time who were getting into this large format printing, and said, don't touch my image, just print it. I want to see what it's going to look like. And they all came back terrible, and I was getting things like, oh yeah, but you haven't adjusted the image right, blah, 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 and all those things. And I ended up walking into a landscape photographer's gallery in Mount Hawthorn and thinking, oh, look at this gallery, this is awesome, I'd love to have something like this. And I was telling him my dilemma, and he said, well, you're not really what I'd class as my competition, because taste is so subjective.
Yeah.
Let me try printing it for you. And I said, all right, well, again, don't touch it. I want to see how it comes out straight away. And it came out perfect.
Right.
Exactly how I wanted. So what we did then was he printed up, I think it was only 2 or 3 for me originally. And we approached anyone and everyone we could think of in the art sort of gallery fraternity to show my work. And I either didn't get replies, or, which is most of the time, or I got replies saying no, not interested. And, I remember we even travelled down to Albany to what at the time was a very well-known gallery down there, and the woman that ran it. And we met at a cafe in Albany and started telling her about our work, my work. And I pulled out, she started saying, oh, look, no, it's not really the kind of thing that's going to sell. No one's going to really want to buy that. And I pulled out just a simple anemone fish shot out of a box that we had stretched up. And as I'm pulling it out, the girls behind the counter in the cafe are going, oh my God, look at that. And this woman actually said to us, oh, we'll see, some people like it, but still wasn't interested in doing it. But she sort of said it in a much more bitchy way than that. And I remember Louise was almost in tears because she couldn't believe that we were getting this sort of rejection. And I don't know where the catalyst for it came from, but we decided to approach what was then the new Fremantle Museum, Maritime Museum, the one that a little bit like the Sydney Opera House on the waterfront there. And we approached them, and I remember getting contacted by their public relations person, their Mike Lefroy, you probably know Mike Lefroy as well, the education officer, and Patrick Baker, their underwater archaeology photographer. And they got back to me, and we had a meeting, and they said, look, we absolutely love it. We think it's educational as well as beautiful to look at. We'll give you a 2.5-month exhibition.
Whoa.
We'll curate it all. I'm thinking, oh, how awesome is this? Yeah. Didn't know at the time that, or didn't think about at the time that to get into the museum you have to pay to get in. So it was limiting the amount of people that would see our work, because unless you paid to get in, you wouldn't see the exhibition. But we did it, and they did it wonderfully. And they said, look, what we want to do is we want to have Patrick shoots in black and white. It's all shots of shipwrecks and things. We'd like to sort of juxtapose that with your beautiful, vivid colour work. Have his on one side and yours on the other. So it's sort of two opposites of photography. And his is, much of his is very, very old stuff, shot with incredibly handmade gear and all that sort of thing. And so we did that. And Louise and I, we'd never worked for ourselves. We'd always had a job. We'd always had a wage or a salary.
Yeah.
And I'd never tried to sell things to people ever. And so we didn't become salesmen. We just engaged people about the stuff. We just talked to them about it. And very early on, within the first few days of the exhibition, we had the staff, the guides from the museum, also in there attending. They'd rotate about 2 or 3 people in there with us at each time. And they said, look, you really need to write something under each print to show what it is, to give it some context. And so I'm never been afraid of writing. And so I did. I just was either a description of it or my thoughts when I was photographing it, or a bit of both, that sort of thing. Not a technical aspect, but more probably an emotional aspect about the shot. And it was fascinating. I'd watch people and they'd come in and they'd carefully read it, and then they'd stand back about 3 or 4 paces and just look at the print, go back and read it, maybe have a look again. Then I'd move on to the next one. People were taking an hour to go through the exhibition. and it was amazing that it gave people a connection to the print. So that was one of the real positives that came out of the staff from the museum. It was quite wonderful. So that gave me the catalyst to quit my job, in that we sold, I can't remember now. I think we sold something like about 120 prints in that 2.5 months, albeit the prices were they're probably about half or 2/3 of what I sell them for now. They were still limited editions. And Louise and I had come home, because she would man it some days and I would man it others, because it was burning you out if you did it all the time. And we'd joke with each other about, well, how many did you sell today? How many did you sell today? But we weren't actively selling. We were just talking to people, and people would sign up and buy. We were allowing them to buy there. The interesting thing was that the museum then got complaints from art galleries about a government body competing against them in the fact that we were selling the work there. So the sad thing about it was that they then were told that they can't do that again, that they can show people's work, but there's absolutely no selling allowed there, by them or the person having the exhibition. And I found that kind of ironic, considering none of them even wanted to show my work. So it was fascinating. But that snowballed on to about 36 or something exhibitions in the next 5.5 years, and even one in Darling Harbour in Sydney. And by the time we got to that one, we realised that, hey, museums won't just give you an exhibition, they'll actually pay you to have an exhibition, because they're constantly looking for exhibitions. They want things to engage the public, and they normally get them imported from Europe, whatever, wherever you are, and they'll pay people. So they paid us to have the exhibition, as well as gave us flights over there to be at it, but we weren't allowed to engage the public. It was quite interesting. The only time we could engage the public there was on a certain day or days, and provided we were with someone from the museum, we weren't allowed to talk to the public ourselves in case we said the wrong thing.
Right.
And that wasn't just us, that was just a universal thing they have with, and you're not trained to talk to the public, so you can't do it.
Oh, right.
So that was fascinating, but still it was quite prestigious to have that. The fascinating thing with having an exhibition over there, over here, I couldn't get the media interested in an exhibition. It was almost impossible to get anyone to come and have a look. The first exhibition at the Fremantle Maritime Museum, we invited all sorts of media to the opening night, none came. Even local newspapers from Fremantle didn't come. Mental block where I was. So over east, if you're not, well, this is where it made me realise, if you're not local, you must be interesting. Right. If you're local, you can't be interesting. I've gone backwards and forwards here. Going back to the other exhibition, that's what I wanted to talk about. We had a guy from the Sunday Times, or it might have been the West Australian, the fold-out magazine, was doing an article on how the glass panels at the Maritime Museum were shattering, and it was a safety issue, and he was coming through to photograph them. And as he came through, he went past my exhibition, and he just looked inside and went, oh, and he came in and started talking to me and said, look, I can't guarantee anything, but this is fantastic. Let me take a few photos. They might want to do a story. So he did. Next thing, they rang me up. They asked me questions over the phone and did I think it was a 3-page story in the lift out. And we had people queuing up to get into the exhibition after that.
Right.
So that was the only media attention I had. Now we go over to Sydney, and I was getting interviewed by radio, I was getting interviewed by newspapers, magazines, everything. I was not local, therefore I was interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating thing.
Boy from out of town.
So the only way I got it here was by accident. But it was a big bonus. And I think having wouldn't necessarily call it it wasn't the financial backing, I guess, of the museum, but having the kudos of the backing of a museum, I think was a huge start for the credibility of my work. And I'll always be thankful for the museum for that, or to the museum for that.
So how did you go from that to pulling the trigger on your own gallery, which is a beautiful space up near the Roundhouse in the West End of Fremantle?
Yeah, we looked for years, and we would toss around in our heads about different locations. And Louise and I don't do anything without really, really thinking about it. And we couldn't find a location that we thought it's going to work. You know, there was several we almost bit the bullet and went into, and we're so glad we didn't. And in that space that I was in, it used to be pretty much, it was a cafe tea room at one stage, and then after that it became a derelict ruin. No businesses really survived there for a huge period of time, and it became quite derelict. And Andrew Carter, the painter, I love Andrew's work. I got talking to Andrew quite a lot in Fremantle about art and selling your work and that sort of thing. And Andrew Carter said to me at one stage, I wish he was in a back street next to the old Maya building, and he said, I've got this fantastic space and I'm going for it. I'm not going to tell you about it. I'll let you know when I get it sorted. And so he'd approached Fremantle Council at the time and said, look, this place is run down. Let me get in there and clean it up, and I'll do the lease. So they gave him a 5+5 commercial lease, and he did it up, and it was beautiful. And I'd often on a weekend just call in and have a coffee and a chat with Andrew. And then there was the thing called the I don't know if it's Alzheimer's or the fact that I'm sort of having this conversation, but I'm having mental blanks. What was the big Fremantle biennial photo Frio.
Oh yeah.
Photo Frio used to happen, and I did it a few times, and it was always very, very hard for a local photographer to find a venue, because all the venues were always given to people they got in from over east or overseas,
people out of town,
to exhibit. They were the main people that they wanted to promote in the biennial, which we found very frustrating. Again, it was, if you're local, you're not interesting. And I did once an exhibition at the Salt Store in Rottnest Island. I just approached them because no one had thought of it, and did it as an extension to the Photo Frio. So it was really, really hard to get a space, and I was talking to Andrew about it one morning, and he said, look, I'll give you a room or two here to have it. And I thought, well, why not? It's a beautiful space. So he gave me the 2 front rooms. And that was interesting for both of us, in that by that stage I'd done so many exhibitions, and I was getting more and more comfortable to talk to people about my work and I guess sell it. And we were on the Photo Frio flyers as the also exhibitions, and we were getting people coming through, and Andrew found it interesting that I was selling these small open edition prints, because he had never done it. He just sells beautiful paintings that are $10,000, $15,000, and he was looking at those and he's going, wow, you sell a few of those. And so we were having a talking about printing and all that sort of thing, and he came up with his own, that he would scan his sketches and sell them, and he was selling them for far more than I sell mine for, but it became his bread and butter, and he was quite fascinated with that. And I also noticed a change in Andrew, because he was a consummate artist. I mean, I'm not great with people. He was a consummate artist in that he absolutely hated talking to people.
Right.
He couldn't stand people coming in and invading his space, and people can be quite cruel in their comments. Not everyone loves your work and that sort of thing. And I noticed in how he started engaging people was quite different in that he started saying some of the things that I was saying almost verbatim, and so I sort of thought, well, I'm on the right track here with how I'm doing, because it really helped him. Anyway, he told me he's just going to leave. He's done quite well. He's decided he's sick and tired of dealing with the public. He hated the concept of cap in hand dealing with art galleries and that sort of thing at the time. And I did as well, because of the rejection I had from art galleries. So he was an independent artist selling his own work, and that's what I wanted to be. And so then it became a turnaround for Andrew in that he wanted to go and live down in Denmark and have his own studio down there. He's got a beautiful studio down there where he paints and does his work. And he's now sought after through galleries. He's got to the stage where, all right, well, I'm successful enough that I can deal with their ludicrous commissions, and that's probably controversial, but now go with the galleries. So he said, I'm leaving the space. And I said, well, all right, how about I take it on? And cut a long story short, I ended up taking over his lease. So he left after only 2.5 years of the lease. So that gave us 7.5 years of his lease. And then we renewed that just recently with the council.
So how have you managed the balance between getting out in the water,
not well,
taking shots, creating new work, putting that together, and then selling it as your, as your means to?
Not well. As a professional, and I use italics here, underwater photographer, I should be in the water all the time photographing. It's time in the water, because it's not like landscape photography where you can wait till the perfect light, perfect conditions and just drive out there and get the photo. Quite often you're travelling vast distances and you're hoping when you get there that the conditions are going to be good, the wildlife's going to be doing what it's supposed to be doing, that sort of thing. And invariably it's not. And so it's very frustrating if you only get to go somewhere for a week or two, and then it's almost impossible to get what you want. And quite often we'll go on a trip and not get anything that I'll deem as an art print. It's hard to balance that, but the business works by keeping it boutique in that we do all our own production, we do all our own selling, we man the gallery ourselves. If we were employing staff and paying other people to produce our work, then I don't think financially it would be successful that it is now. So we've got the mix right. When we first started, I remember Louise looking at the Peter Licks of the world and thinking and saying to me, we should open multiple galleries, we should, aspire to have a gallery in Las Vegas or wherever, employ staff. And I just looked at her, because my job, the technical job that I had before this, was very, very stressful. And I just sort of thought, why do I need that stress? And I explained to her that, sure, your overheads go up, your stress level goes up, it becomes something you have to manage. It would be a nightmare. It's not the path I want. It's about lifestyle. It's about enjoying life. So it's never been to try and become massively wealthy. It's about balancing a life where we get to go and travel and do what we love.
Go diving,
and then to sell our work. And it's what I say to people that come through the gallery sometimes. I mean, I quite often get people saying, absolutely love your work, you've got the best job in the world. And I say, but 80-90% of the time I'm actually like everyone else with a day job doing this. It's the other 10% that I'm in the water albeit that the day job is my own day job.
Yes.
And that I am selling my own work in a beautiful setting, that sort of thing. So, and I'm my own boss. So that is a huge, huge plus. It is the best job in the world. But yeah, there's always the component of making the living, and it had to work for us. There was the choice was it either worked or I went back to being a tradie. There was no middle ground.
How does the fact you now have a gallery and obviously you're trying to sell your pictures, has that changed ultimately the pictures that you try and take, or do you still go after the sort of shot that you would have done way back when you had your little Weathermatic? Did you look at stuff and go, "Oh, that'll sell," or do you look at stuff and go, or do you look at stuff and go, "That'll just be a great picture"?
I've learnt not to go, "That will sell." I've learnt not to try and come up with a shot that I'll think will be a good seller. I used to let Louise would often use input going through our images saying, "Oh no, you've got to bring that one out, that one's going to be a big seller." And we joke about it a lot. It's interesting what does sell, and I've found that it's not...
This was going to be another question I had for you. Do you find things sell? Do you take a picture sometimes and go, "Surely that's going to go," and it doesn't, and yet one that you don't think does?
Absolutely, all the time. Some of the simplest shots. But I've learnt that if it's got a wow factor, an X factor, and I can't tell you what that is, I just know when I've got it. When I look at it and go, "Nailed it."
Yeah.
That's when it generally sells. So if it's proven by the fact that years ago when I first started taking photos, I would take a few shots. It's funny now, I see other divers, underwater photographers doing this, and I sort of have a bit of a chuckle. They'll take a few shots and then they're racing on to find the next subject, and taking a few shots and then racing on to find, because you're so worried you're going to miss something in your 1 hour that you get underwater. Whereas now, if I find a subject, I'll just stay with it until I really feel comfortable that I've got the best I can given the situation out of it. And it's almost never a situation that's perfect.
Yeah.
So you've got to work with what's there. But the interesting thing, and this is where it comes back to overthinking the image, is that I'd say 90% of the time it's one of the first 2 shots that I've taken that I use.
Right.
All the others I've thought about it too much.
Right.
And when I look at it, I go, "Nah." Whereas what I do on instinct seems to work. So it's interesting.
How has things like social media and Instagram helped build the brand of Glen Cowans? Because I checked it out, you've got 13,500 followers on there, and the stuff, obviously being a photographer, the stuff you do lends itself to something like Instagram. There's a big sigh there.
You're talking to someone that absolutely hates social media and thinks it's the evil of the world.
Yes. Does it drive sales?
It does, yes. As to how much, very hard to quantify. Whilst we have a huge following on Instagram, I think Facebook is the main instigator of any sales that come from social media. Instagram seems to more be other photographers and people that are interested in my work more from the photographic aspect than a purchasing aspect.
Right. So it's like a fellow professional photographer.
Yeah. There's a bit of a joke about social media in that it's fascinating when you put out a good photo. You'll quite often get a lot of likes, but it's interesting how many people you can see on the reach that view your photo that don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, it's getting the reach, it's getting out there, but there's a lot of people out there that won't like someone's photo. They won't click like, and it's usually it's quite often other photographers. I've talked to a few photographers about this because we actively like other people's photography. You know, if it's a shot that I think's great, we won't hesitate in putting a nice comment and liking it. But I've talked to quite a few photographers who won't even do that, and they'll follow someone until they follow them, and then they'll unfollow them. Because all they're trying to do is get, you know, social media does my head in.
I can see, yeah.
So we just treat it as, well, this is what we do, and hey, if we like your stuff, we'll like it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it's a huge aspect of the sales, no.
Right.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. So as over the last 10 years, has it been generally just ticking it away at it?
Social media, yeah.
And the business itself.
Oh, the business, yeah.
I mean, who buys your stuff? Have you seen a trend?
The demographic, non-divers, probably in the age group of 40 plus.
Right.
Yeah, 40 to 55 maybe. Maybe 35 to 55. Yeah.
Because as a wedding present, I bought my sister your picture of Stingray.
Oh,
it's
okay.
above their bed.
Yeah.
Back
Cool.
in England.
Yeah, awesome. They like it.
Love it.
Cool. Yeah.
Curious to know. So, where would Glen have been had he not given up the technical job?
Who knows? Yeah, we often, because for us it was a conscious decision not to have children.
Yeah.
We love our lifestyle. And there's also all the future of the world thing to consider. But we often joke that had we not gone down this path, would we have had children? Where would we be? We possibly even wouldn't be living where we are. We'd probably still be in Willerton in the suburbs with 3 kids and still both of us working and trying to put them through university, or that probably would be over by now.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. But that's you can't really.
Yeah.
You know, who knows?
What does the next 3 to 5 years look like? Any goals?
No, I noticed that was one of your pre-conversation questions, and I've always been the kind of person that doesn't really have goals. As crazy as that may seem, I think I inherited that from my mother. I prefer just to be excited to be alive, and the business has always been reactive. It's not been planned. We just want to see, I guess, and do as much as we can and enjoy life. We do enjoy it. It's one wonderful aspect, and in fact the gallery is in a way become a pseudo-social life because we meet so many people and we have so many conversations during the day that it's quite wonderful to keep doing that. That said, quite often, you know, we'll get to the end of the weekend and just go,
yeah. Let's have a couple of days not talking.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There you go. What have you learnt about yourself on this journey?
They say you get your audience in if you have periods of silence. What have I learned about myself? Patience, I think, more than anything. I've developed far more. I used to be very impatient as a child, and I think I've learned a lot more about patience. Probably a lot more about talking to people. It wasn't a joke about the does not communicate well with others. And so it's helped me grow, I think, in being able to talk to people. It's not something I relish at all.
Yeah.
It's helped me to definitely communicate.
Super. What's Glen grateful for?
My wife, most definitely. We wouldn't be in the life we're in if it wasn't for Louise. Just life in general. Immensely grateful for the start that the Fremantle Maritime Museum gave me. I'm not trying to do any promotion here or anything, but that was probably the biggest start I could have had. Grateful for the parents that I had and the upbringing that I had, the nurturing. Yeah.
If you could go back and give Glen a piece of advice shortly before he decided he was going to give up his electrical career, from this point in time, what piece of advice would you give him?
Don't sweat the first 2 or 3 years, because that was a mind game. Mind fuck, I call it.
Yeah.
Because after I left school at 15, immediately into an apprenticeship. Louise was the same. She left school early and went straight into work. We had always earned a wage or a salary, and to quit that and not know where your next dollar was going to come in was extremely difficult. And
scary.
Very scary. We did have the buffer that Louise, for quite a few years, stayed with her day job. Now she's not, now that we're more established. But I was also working from home during that period of doing all those exhibitions and production and everything. We converted the biggest room in our house, the biggest bedroom in our house which was the main bedroom, it was a unit, not a house, into a production area, and I worked from home. And that was very hard because I felt like I had to overcompensate because I wasn't going to a day job.
Yeah.
And so I was just...
You've been used to it.
Yeah, so I was just... And I wasn't earning a wage or a salary, and so I was just putting my head into that all the time, and I never got a break from it because I worked from home. And so the second I got up, I was thinking I had to push myself. And that said, that drive probably helped.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
There was definitely periods of stress at first, about whether it would be successful. Yeah.
And when did you finally think, almost, this is going to...
Probably, we started off the business in the black from the first exhibition at the Maritime Museum. We developed from those sales a nest egg that we rolled over back into the business, and we invariably roll most of the income back into the business apart from what we used to live. So yeah, it was. Yeah, no, I've lost it. I've lost the thread.
Yeah. Well, the original question was, what piece of advice would you give the younger Glen? And you were saying how don't sweat the first couple of years.
Yeah. I hate questions like this. Yeah, no, I've completely lost my thread.
That's all right.
Mm.
That's all right. And what piece of nugget would you give any younger, aspiring underwater photographer who's out there listening to this, thinking, "I've always wanted to do that"?
Perseverance. Quite often, they say that one of the biggest failures in exhibiting your work is that the first exhibition will probably go reasonably well because you will have friends and family supporting you and buying work, and that other exhibitions after that won't. And so I think a lot of people would give up. So you have to persevere beyond that. And I think also a large body of work. I mean, by the time I started this, I already had thousands of images on file, so I had a body of work to fall back on.
Yeah.
And I know the analogy's probably not great, but I can understand how when a band or a singer brings out an album, and then the next album they bring out has to be as good as. If it's not, then it's a failure. And it's the same with a body of work for art. And if you haven't got something to back up the first exhibition with, then you're going to crash and burn. You've got to be continually bringing out new stuff. Now, it's not a huge amount of new stuff, but you've got to continually be bringing out new stuff to, I guess, expand what you're showing to the public. That said, my first exhibition I showed 31 canvases. The next year I brought out another 30. The next year I brought out another 30. The year after that I went, what the hell am I doing? I can't bring out 30 new images every year. Can you imagine having to show and store and display all those images? So now I bring out maybe half a dozen max a year, maybe only 2 or 3. So it's been maybe more fussy too on what I bring out. So yeah, body of work and perseverance, and love what you're doing.
Superb. Glad it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you this morning.
Apart from the moments where my mind just suddenly went blank.
That's all right. If anybody wants to come and find you, where can they find you?
We're right next door to the Roundhouse, 9 Captain's Lane, so it's the pilot's cottage right next door to the Roundhouse.
And obviously you're out there on Instagram and Facebook.
Instagram, Facebook, we don't do Twitter, we leave that to Trump.
Yeah. No, Glenn, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I've been in your gallery a number of times. It's great to get to meet the person behind the lens. And also thank you because, like you said from the start, you are a more quieter, introverted character. And so to come and do this, I'm very grateful.
Thank you for having me. You'll notice, I guess, that the conversation probably increased in tempo when it wasn't talking about myself.
Yeah.
But when it's talking about myself, it sort of minimises, and I start to think about other things, and then my mind goes blank. And
There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.